And that's the thing is like, so I mean, the answer for Europe can't just be like, oh, we need a venture capital ecosystem, so let the government do it. That's just such a horrible job, like a horrible amount of reasoning. And there's the old, what is it, the old saying about insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
I believe that by far you're the biggest European cheerleader because you're kind of helping Europe being much more.
But it needs a stick, right?
Yeah.
It just needs like somebody to like, because I mean, there's a lot of performative sort of measures in Europe where Europe knows it has to do stuff, so often it copies things in the US, but it doesn't actually know how to do it.
Yeah.
So if you look at the EU Chips Act or the AI Act or all these initial like the initiatives like the Gigafactory, all this stuff, like they're like, we know notionally we have to do it, but we don't actually know how to do it, and we don't hire the people who actually know how to do it.
Yeah, I wonder.
Which we end up with a lot of innovation theater.
Yeah, a lot of papers, a lot of
It's
policy.
all performative.
Yeah.
It's all, there's lots of published papers, and there's lots of
Suits.
there's lovely conferences with champagne cocktails and all sorts of stuff, and like openings of this and releasing the white paper. We're gonna have an event about it, and lots of politicians and bureaucrats show up, but nothing actually happens.
Well, our dearest Proxima was in the news today, so if there is one company that is building something,
No,
at
it's good.
speed-
I think there are companies that are building things. I think there's this issue with Europe is like once you get to a certain point, like in deep tech in Europe, like after Series B, most of your funding and most of your revenue comes from abroad.
Yeah.
And it'll be the same case for Proxima in the future rounds.
Yeah, even this round we had DST, Lightspeed.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't raise 9-figure rounds in Europe without U.S. money.
Yeah.
And so I think increasingly you're seeing a lot of the early stage deep tech companies in Europe just realize that even for Series A, they can, or even earlier than that, they just start getting international investors involved. So you go to the Gulf, you go to East Asia, and you go to the U.S.
Yeah.
And those are the three. I think it doesn't matter if you're a VC now or a startup or a scale up. Those are the three regions that have money. So that's where you go.
Where do those? Because we are super early stage. We're the first check, but those big funds that are able to do billion-dollar rounds, where do they raise from? From institutional investors and banks,
from pension funds, from banks,
and pension funds and endowments and all that.
endowments, some very large family offices,
And there
corporates even.
and there is no equivalent in Europe. Why? Because those large institutional investors.
There are
they don't
large
see-
institutional investors in Europe. They just don't invest in anything innovative, right?
yeah.
I mean, you start looking at the pension fund systems in Europe. I mean, there's trillions of euros of pension fund money in Europe. It just doesn't get allocated to anything growth-oriented because the capital markets just aren't. They're broken here. They're too small. They're too fragmented.
Yeah.
So if you just keep looking after example after example after example, like if you're a growth-oriented company, listing in Europe is just foolish.
Yeah, so an article today by post by who's that founder who started to post more? Crandall or Criano? No, there's I forgot. But he was saying how he wouldn't list in Europe, and he was breaking down the reasons for it.
Yeah, the Dutch-Swiss company.
Exactly right. Yes,
Yeah.
I've been seeing him online and over.
Yeah. I think he's kind of getting more vocal and building a voice for himself. It's a spin-out. I think it's a spin-out from ETH.
And this is the reason why we do this, by the way, is for the scientists to, in fact, provide the scientists with some insight around how the other stakeholders work.
Yeah.
And so for them to understand that, yes, you may be able to raise your pre-seed here, but then eventually you have to start building your relationships now with U.S. investors for your
But any company in
Series
Europe
A,
has to
Series
be,
B.
they have to be global from day one.
Yeah.
They have to be international from day one. There's just no way you can scale. You get these companies who are, unfortunately, there's a mentality in Europe often where the companies are not really thinking outside a certain X 100-kilometer radius, right? And I think that's just the wrong mentality to have building a company.
I find that there are some great innovations in places like in Austria and Switzerland. But then our fellows from those regions, they are so incentivized to stay local because there's so much taxpayers
And
grants.
also, if you're like a PhD in Switzerland, right? I mean, you can be making as a postdoc close to probably $100K a year.
Yeah.
there's not a huge motivation to go out and be entrepreneurial. I think one of the biggest problems you get at places like ETH is that they don't want to leave the nest because it's super comfortable. Why would you go out and be entrepreneurial, right? It's the same thing up in Norway. It's in places that are just very sort of cash heavy in the ecosystems in terms of how they reward scientists and postdocs. And yeah, there's not a huge motivation to go out and do your own thing because you can be very comfortable, very cushy for the rest of your life.
We just incorporated a Swiss company. Swiss-based founders incorporated in the US.
Oh, okay.
And one of them has already moved to Boston.
Nice.
And so really we've pushed them to really let go of the Swiss playbook.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh yeah, we've got founders who have exited in a similar field within Switzerland. They're advising us. And then I asked them, what was the exit? I said, 100 mil.
Yeah, there's not a lot of big success stories in Switzerland in terms of sort of startup, scale up success stories. There's a few, but I think again, it's relative to sort of the positioning of places like ETH and EPFL. It should be producing sort of bigger results. I think it does produce a lot in terms of volume, like a lot of quantity of spin outs, but then they don't raise much money and they don't become any kind of sector leaders.
It's a problem that we know very well, right?
And there's a lot of ecosystems like that. A lot of the comfortable, cushier ecosystems. The Dutch are the same way.
Interesting, but
Norway, places like that. So lots of funding for research and science, but it's almost the point where it's so much funding that they can make a decent salary and live a comfortable life, and which is nothing wrong with that. It's just you start to get Dutch disease, right? Which was back when they had the from economics.
I've never heard of that. What is that?
So it's back from economics when the Dutch discovered a lot of natural gas in the north of the Netherlands. There was so much cash into the country, entrepreneurship levels just dropped. And so Norway experienced something similar, where you just had so much cash and a guaranteed pension, all this kind of stuff. There has to be some sort of element of, there has to be some sort of motivation, right? It can be a carrot or a stick, but there has to be some reason why you're going out and being entrepreneurial. I think Europe, it's kind of like a weird thing. It's like you had for centuries, right? If people wanted to go out and make a better life for themselves, often they emigrated. They went to the U.S., Canada, South America, Australia, whatever. And so it was a conversation I was having. I was up in Sweden recently, and some of the Swedish government was like, "Oh, we're Vikings." It's like, well, technically, like, no, you're not. The Vikings all left. You're just like the descendants of the people who didn't have what it takes to be a Viking.
There's that spirit of adventure. We had Sean Gurley here because he exited his second company in AI space to the government of the US. He's a Kiwi actually that did his PhD at Oxford and then moved to San Francisco in 2008 at the beginning of YC. And we were talking about this spirit of adventure that you need to have in order to be a founder.
There has to be an appetite for risk, right? If you're incredibly risk averse, like being a founder is not a logical. Going out and leaving a comfortable job to go out and start your own thing is not the most logical move you can make. Like, there's a huge amount of risk involved. Lots of shit can go wrong. It's fucking tough. There's long hours. You got to deal with a lot of shit. The lawyers, the accountants, everything else. Like it is not like a glamorous thing to do. So there has to be a lot of conviction, but also two, absolute acceptance of the risk that you're going to be taking. And for some people, a lot of people are just not wired that way. So I think you find that out where, because kind of in Europe, particularly like in the last few years, like entrepreneurship's kind of become a trendy thing to do. So especially with like the internet companies and a lot of the SaaS stuff, like people were just like, oh, like cool, I'm gonna go out and start my own startup. It's like, okay, cool, but like, as opposed to like, the very same people could have any previous wave of trend in terms of employment, they would have done something else.
It's being featured, I think, within academia also as a career choice, actually, at times, which is very scary because then the second thing that you hear is that, but I want to be a founder because I can have a better work-life balance. And
that's insane.
It's insane how little
crazy
understanding there is.
But and you get that, right? Where I think now what you're seeing is, I think the most ambitious founders and companies I'm seeing realize that at the moment, one of the biggest moats to a business is speed, right? It's just how fast you can execute, how fast you can scale, how fast you can commercialize your technology, etc. And so they and their companies are just in sprint mode right now. And I think, there's been a lot of people who've kind of made that public observation that, yes, it's, there's 996, there's this kind of intensity that's been turned up. And I think a lot of people reacted negatively to that, which is fine. But the reality is that's just the way things are, right? Like if you're super ambitious, you're going to have to sprint right now. Because you're seeing like AI companies that have been around for like less than 24 months getting acquired for billions. Yeah. So it's just, and no, is 996 necessarily the best way to work? No, but it's the way you have to work sometimes in more specific periods.
I don't hear many founders within our portfolio who are complaining about I'm working too much.
No, I don't think. I think if you love what you do, you're not doing that. And there's stuff.
If anything, they're complaining about people around them who are only offering a hurdle. Like they're not working fast enough. It could be the
because right
stakeholders
now, I think
like lawyers.
I think with what's happening in innovation, and it could be anything from AI to CRISPR, right? You're just having literally on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, just huge breakthroughs happening. And so if you're kind of being lackadaisical about it, you're going to miss out on just huge opportunities. And so like it is, and you have to love what you do, and you have to be patient and just passionate and just go for it. Is that always the best thing if you have family? But in reality, is like you find a way to make it work.
You were a founder once, no?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought of getting back on the?
I became an investor, which makes you too fucking lazy.
Yeah, it's
any investor who tries to tell you like, oh my god, I'm working as much as a founder is full of shit. At the same point in time, like I think I wouldn't invest in, as a rule of thumb, any startup that's being launched by someone just coming out of it. VC's like, it's a cushy, anybody who says it's not a cushy job is just full of shit. Yes, there's a lot of pressure. Yes, you have a fiduciary responsibility where you're managing other people's money, and that comes with a lot of weight. At the same point in time, you can also just take 6 months and say, I'm going to do a deep dive on this sector. It's like, come on. As a founder, you can't fucking do that.
So you were thinking of coming to Berlin for the Super Venture event, and then you went like, that's not a priority, or I don't need to see.
It's just I was supposed to go. I had something else come up that was. Look, all those tech events are nice. It's mostly just, particularly in Europe, it's mostly just like networking, like ways to meet other people. I've spoken at Super Venture, I have never found it to be super useful from a fundraising perspective. I had to go meet an actual LP with actual money, and that was a priority over, going to a couple of parties thrown by European VCs, which is all this shit is.
I went there. It was the first time for me at that event, but even at a GP related event, I think Dee is much more versed in this world and knows many more people. And I mainly went to show my face to a couple of LPs who didn't believe I existed because they'd never seen me on calls.
But I think, the LP scene there, I do think Super Return, which is focused on the private equity firms, just because private equity is much more established in Europe, that tends to be much more useful in terms of actually meeting
It looks
LPs.
Serious.
That's far more serious.
It was parallel in other venues, but it looked like top dogs.
That's because private equity is a legit industry in Europe. Venture capital is still an emerging industry in Europe.
I wonder whether the venture capital industry is going to change entirely now with AI. You talked about speed of execution.
Yeah, I think it's going to augment it. Venture is still very much so an access game, and a lot of that has to do with just who you know. And the AI, if AI can help you manage those relationships better, scout deals better. At the end of the day, there was research done, it must have been like 10 years ago, which just showed as like the quality of the investors in the deal was very much indicative of the actual outcome of the deal. So like the better your co-investors are, the better your likely outcome is, right? So it's just, and it's who you know, and that changes, it can change over time, right? So the top VCs, a lot of the top VCs from 10, 15, 20 years ago are no longer the same top VCs, right? Because it changes, right? People retire and everything. So it's very much so who your network is in a very specific moment in time can impact your returns a lot.
Interesting. The human aspect, of course, because then the relationships and
relationships end. People fucking buy a yacht and they sail off, and they're just like, cool, I'm done with this VC game.
And what about these firms that have been restructuring, like General Catalyst and Sequoia, and even Lightspeed are now kind of doing the entire span of venture? Like
but I do think if you look at some of the earlier VC firms, even on this side of the Atlantic, right? If you look at the Three I's, the Apex partners, they all started on the venture game, and then they over time developed into multi-asset investment firms, right? And I remember having dinner with Maurice Chenio, who was one of the co-founders of Apex Partners, which is a really large private equity firm. But when they started in, I think their origin was like late 60s, early 70s. So it was Ronald Cohen, Maurice Chenio, and Alan Patrikoff. They met at Harvard Business School, started this firm. They had offices in New York, Paris, London. And it started out very much of doing like tech deals, because that was still when the silicon industry, semiconductors was kind of coming up, and that's what they wanted to do. And then they realized, ooh, actually, like the private equity game is financially more interesting. And so they pivoted there. I do think inevitably, as you grow in with AUM, like at a certain point in time, if your game plan is say, okay, let's grow AUM, eventually your fund size becomes your business model. And if you're just about scaling AUM, you can't do venture anymore.
Yeah,
venture becomes a teeny tiny side thought, right? Like if you're Andreessen Horowitz and you've got whatever the hell they have now under management, 30-40 billion, you're not really a venture firm anymore.
Wow. 2% of
and not bad, right?
Yeah.
And then you really become a financial house, right? And if you look at like some of the the earlier tech investors, right, whether angel investors, like angel investors that put money into Henry Ford, et cetera, going back, I mean, eventually everybody branches out. So the people who just want to do like super early stage all day, every day for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, that's because it's your obsession.
Like it's 100% it's your goal, right?
You enjoy the founder's relationship.
Absolutely.
And
but
finding the rough.
If your goal is to have some sort of like create a large financial institution, then you're quickly going to scale out of venture.
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing you can still do venture, but it's going to be very much a small piece of your overall pie.
And what about funds buying other funds? This is something that I never knew that could happen.
Yeah, so it happens a lot, right? Like, EQT has bought some funds, Eurazeo has bought some funds. It's much more of a European thing.
Yeah. GC bought La Familia, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. So General Catalyst bought La Familia, but like EQT has bought funds. Eurazeo has bought funds. You have other examples where you also have large institutional investors coming in as like cornerstone and buying chunks of mancos, like so Apollo taking a piece of Sofianova, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that also happens. And sometimes that can be, some large institutional investors could come in and say, okay, we'll seed all of your future funds. We'll take like whatever, 20-25% of your manco. And then somewhere down the line, it's an acquisition play.
And what's the idea there? So for example, I was just trying to role play the idea of General Catalyst buying La Familia. Is that because they wanted exposure to Europe, or?
Yeah, it could have been just a relationship. It could have been. I don't know the specifics there. It could have been the General Catalyst was already an LP.
I see.
And they figured, okay, look, we want to expand in Europe. Let's just instead of building organically, we're going to. And so I think they're becoming much more of a financial brand entity, anyways. So they could just say, okay, cool. Like instead of going out and they already had people in Europe, so I think it was a way for them to just kind of scale the team in Europe. And you get that where you get like say EQT when EQT bought, was it LS in the Netherlands, a big life science firm. It was just I think part of their way to say, okay, we've got multiple products. This firm is now like our life science team for Europe. Yeah, and you go that way. And I think similar with because a lot of the larger firms, because again when you start managing hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars, like you're looking for platform plays. So you're looking like it was Blackstone just announced they're going to put $500 billion into Europe. Last year, Apollo invested $222 billion. So you're talking about like large scale of capital, and so for them, sometimes they just want to invest, take a piece of a bunch of different platforms, whatever pays off, like, and then after those subsequent investments in the venture firms, they can be like, cool, once you're going to scale, once you're going to IPO, post-IPO, we can come in and be an investor in those as well.
You clearly have a very good pulse on what's happening in Europe. How do you read the current situation in the US with all the different reforms at every level, tariffs, foreign policy?
I think it's mostly just noise. I think honestly the funding, if you're looking at sort of tech funding, I think the gap between the US and Europe is growing. I think if you start looking at certain strategic industries like space, for example, I think the gap there between the US and Europe is growing. I think a lot of European, particularly senior politicians and bureaucrats, can kind of see the noise in the US and they think it's somehow a negative signal. But like, look, when Trump was president before, the gap between Europe and the US grew. There's not really much reason to think it's not going to keep growing now.
And we're settling in his administration, or it will take a few more quarters, or it's going to be 4 years of rock and roll?
It was four. Last time he was president, it was 4 years of drama. And I think it'll be 4 more years. But it's at least, it's drama can be good for markets, right? Like uncertainty and chaos can be good for markets. It can really, reveal some opportunities. It can fast forward some needed demise of companies or industries, like so.
Or regulators as well. I think,
Yeah.
for how critical you want to be about Trump, but I think most biotech entrepreneurs are looking forward to know what's going to happen with the FDA, if it's going to become more friendly.
And that thing is like, so there's also an opportunity, like if you just keep, there is this solid argument that there's just far too much regulation, right? So if you have an administration that comes on and says, you know what, fuck regulation, that can also be a good thing in certain industries, right? Certain industries that have become far over-regulated, and that over-regulation can be a huge friction point. So it can impede the progress of a lot of companies, whether it's in pharma, whether you start looking at things like gene editing. There's a whole list of things that could be going faster than they've been going.
You said noise is just noise, and it reminded me of something. And I don't know if I've ever shared with you how 3 years ago I was asked to be on the advisory board for the Spin Out Review here in the UK for the TTO review, and
which is the fucking hilarious. It's just such a hilarious. I mean, it was essentially. I mean, the co-chairs were Oxford and Cambridge, so it was like literally.
Oh yeah, it was an ambush. I was totally ambushed. I walked into a government meeting with basically 12 of the TTOs and myself.
It was essentially the students grading their own homework, right? What's wrong with spin outs? Ooh, let's have the universities in charge.
The first line.
It's the stupidest shit ever.
First line of the first meeting was Michael Jackson is just noise. I don't know if I've ever shared that with you. It was incredible. So basically the review was set up to, in effect, look at all the criticism that TTOs were receiving based on the voices, our voices, your voices, Nathan's work. That's why it was summoned. And the first thing that they opened up with is that let's not worry about people like Michael Jackson, they're just noise. And then from there, it was like 6 months of work, having discarded all of what we were advocating for, and in fact, the outcome
I think it was one of the most rigged. I mean, it was just honestly, like from a British politics standpoint, it was just sad and pathetic. It was complete setup. Yeah. It was the students grading their own homework. Yeah. Essentially, like the TTO is saying, "Oh my God, we're doing such a great job." It's like, well, that's not objective.
Yeah, it was very disappointing for me actually to be there, because I had been working hard to improve the ecosystem in the UK. We were starting in the UK, and I thought that politics would change that. And in fact, I understood the reason why people don't trust the public thing to bring change.
But that's the thing, is like, and I think people are like, okay, why is this kind of rise in populism? It's because of shit like that. It was absolutely not objective. It was absolutely rigged. And I think it's those types of just government hubris and inability to accurately self-evaluate that just make people not trust the government. Because and that's like a minor scale, right? I mean, the amount of people that actually give a shit about tech spin-outs is not very fucking high. But they're doing it for that. They're doing it for everything.
Exactly right. To me, it's so symbolic of. And then I started thinking about all of those dissenting voices that in this very country were arrested for nearly a decade for doing the right thing. And so I kind of switched off on trying to things change from the public thing, and we over-focused on founders and spending more time in the US, which has been a blessing.
Yeah, I think Europe unfortunately has an entrenched bureaucratic class that is just going to continue to hinder its growth and progress for the foreseeable future. And I think, honestly, in Europe, like the quality of life is amazing, the lifestyle is great. I think there eventually will be serious pain. I think the cracks are in the foundation are already very visible, but the governments can kind of hide a lot of stuff for now. And I do think in the next couple of decades, the pain is really going to get felt because, like, I mean, look at like the demographics in Europe are shit, right? It's as a continent, it has the oldest average age. Birth rates keep dropping. You start looking. There's been more deaths than births in Germany since 1972. Italy has the lowest number of births since unification. I mean, you just go across the board, right? And so, what the fuck's going to be in Europe in 20 years when the average European is like 50-something years old? This just, when you're at a certain age, no matter what people will try to say, like most true innovation, most true scientific breakthroughs, etc., happen when people are younger. It's just fucking nature, right? And so having it when there's a bunch of people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, like a culture based on that, it's just, I think the sort of impact on that from how a society is going to behave and react, I think people are underestimating just how traumatic it's going to be.
Very interesting, because the majority of the people say, oh yeah, the problem with low natality and a shrinking population is that you won't have the workforce for it. And so the argument, oh, well, robotics and AI are going to compensate that. But you're making a point around the fact that you're losing creative capital as well.
You're creative capital, risk-taking appetite. There's a lot of stuff that you just don't take the same amount of leaps that you do in your 50s and 60s as you do in your 20s and 30s, right? Now look at creative output across the board, whether it's literature, music, science, whatever. There's not a lot of people in their 60s just banging out a lot of great creative ability, right? If you look at most authors, bands, musicians, composers, whatever, most of their great stuff happens on the younger side. And so what happens when your entire society is old? I remember being in Italy a couple summers ago, and I remember being in a park, and I was walking around, I was like, man, there's just something off. I can't figure out what the fuck is wrong here. I was looking around, I was like, this is just weird. It's a beautiful park, beautiful day, it was amazing. And I realized there was no kids in the park. You had a park with no children. Like, it was eerie. And I do think, and there's starting to be interesting things. I do wonder how much of it is culturally, how much of it becomes memetics, right? Where how much of it is just this behavior. If you have a large percentage of a population that doesn't ever spend time around people with kids, it just becomes then learned to not have kids, right? Yeah. And it's just, God, is it in a tech thing? It's weird to start talking about Rene Girard. I'll start talking like Peter Thiel or something now. But I think the reality is like you do have this kind of learned behavior. So if you're like a young professional in the early 30s and none of your friends have kids and you've never even like held a baby, but you start looking at a lot of countries where the birth rates are so low, that's a reality. Having a kid just never crosses your mind.
Paul Merlocki was in a podcast recently commenting that falling in love and having kids young, it has worked better for him than the idea of basically living by yourself until you're 40 and then having to learn to live with somebody and engineer a family around you, right? So we're very active in, as you know, in investing in fertility. This is one of the core challenges that we're trying to fight scientifically, but the biggest challenge is social. There's not a technical.
No. For me, I think it's a social issue, right? It's about also cost, right? There's housing. There's all sorts of things that it's for most people gotten cost prohibitive to have kids, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, again, going back to things like regulation, it's just not enough housing's being built. Not enough. There's lots of things that just from a societal standpoint, like you're saying, okay, great. If you're looking at certain political groups who say, oh no, we need to have this, and this, but then they have a huge amount of regulation on top of it where you can actually build it. Well, then that's just sadistic.
It's a very European problem, and California, I think.
And California, and so that's the thing is, like, I think when you get sort of entrenched let's be honest, often prolonged sort of center left and left wing politics, you get lots of regulation. And so they're just like, oh, we need to have all of these programs. But then they make it incredibly, because of regulation, they make it actually incredibly costly to have that. So you have like housing units in Washington, D.C., which are supposed to be for low-cost housing. Because there's so much regulation, it's costing like over $1 million per unit to build. So again, like people I think have to step back and realize that, cool, if we want to have housing for everybody, we need to make it cheap and affordable. But to make it cheap and affordable means that we can't regulate utterly stupid shit.
That's one of the challenges. Yes, it's shelter.
But I mean, there's a lot. I mean, it's just one of those examples, right? Like if you were saying, okay, cool, like it was an interesting statistic I heard when I was actually in an event for the EU, and they were saying that on average in Europe, the average European woman has one child less than she would like. And so, if that's the case, that means there's something structurally wrong with a lot of it, in terms of building a career, in terms of support, in terms of housing, in terms of a lot of things, right? And so
I don't know of a family of our generation that can afford to have one income. So both parents need to work.
It's getting harder and harder. I mean, think about. I mean, just in general, even taking it away from the fertility issue, looking at kind of the issue of how many people now in Europe don't end up buying a home until they're in their mid to late 50s, and they end up doing so because they just inherited money because their parents died.
Yeah.
And so I think the percentage of the GDP in Europe, which is inheritance, just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And so, again, in terms of, if you're looking at like social mobility, that's incredibly negative, right? Which to me is also supply and demand, right? So if a big chunk of your population can't afford to buy property or buy a home until their parents die, and then it just gets recycled, right? So like the person who inherits at like 58, their parents die, they inherit some money at 58, they buy a home, and then they die, and their kid buys a home in their 50s, and it's just this.
It's the impact in my mind is also that you're living your life anchored on somebody else's life.
Absolutely.
And so you are not spending the best years of your life trying to either moving around or investing or being able to create more. You're just, anchored to your success is capped.
You're anchored. Your success is capped, and your happiness in later life is very much so dependent on your parents' or grandparents' financial position. And it's true. I think you just have a lack of. I've just been amazed at how many people I meet in Europe who have, went to great schools, have successful jobs, but then you look at the salaries, and they're just not. They just don't have enough money to buy a place in London or Paris or whatever.
Yeah, it's a form of arbitrage for certain tech companies because you can build here cheaper.
Yeah, 100%, and that's great. And I think a lot of founders should do that, right? I think a lot of founders should take advantage of that arbitrage. Where they put their front office, put their CEO, COO, head of sales, all that stuff in the U.S., and then have all the scientists, researchers, engineers, et cetera, here, because the one that's cheaper. In terms of scientific talent is equal. It's cheaper, and oftentimes you can get grants and subsidies from the European government to even make it even more cheaper for you as a company.
And they, I think they will have to start thinking much more about careers outside of academia, because I don't see the amount of funding increasing over time, and most universities are struggling from a balance sheet perspective.
No,
right?
they're struggling and to be honest, like a lot of universities, they just got incredibly bloated. There's a huge amount of bloat across the board. I mean, there's just. And I think it's become this, there's this argument to say, oh, it's great that, the majority of the population now has a university degree. It's like, but does the majority of the population need a university degree? As a net, I don't think so. And I think there is this kind of thing where when you get too large of a percentage of a population, which is almost overeducated.
And depends what degree as well, right? Because you're incentivized to spend time in an education institution, but not necessarily learning the skills that are
No, I
necessary
mean,
in the
honestly, yeah. I
workforce.
mean, there's a lot of degrees which are just absolutely not applicable. And so,
Yeah.
at least in Europe, the tuition is low. I mean, I was talking with someone recently in the U.S. whose daughter is going to a like $40,000 a year school to become like a second grade teacher. It's like that is not a smart use of
Yeah.
money. Or spending, another one where like the school is 50, 60K a year and that person is getting a degree in some obscure, like it was like 17th century poetry or something. It's like, okay, great. It's just not.
Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of graduates that are coming out with almost indoctrinated on activism.
Yeah,
If you look at the majority of, I was there during graduation week at MIT, at Harvard, even the Stanford one, and I was on campus. I was just having meeting, with the founders and all of that. But the amount of non-relevant, or actually, it felt dark. When you're graduating, you're hopeful for the future. You're going out and you're hugging your classmates, and you're wondering, okay, I have an internship this summer. And it just didn't feel the same energy as when I graduated. And I graduated during 2008, which was the financial crisis. And there was a theme that I understand why Harvard is in this pickle, right? Because
no, and that's the thing is, like, I think when even you start looking even like mainstream science publications became politicized, right? Where they started mixing activism with things like biology. I mean, it's just not the place of science, right? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of good scientists are just going to have to deal with the next handful of years where I think you're dealing with a cultural battle within higher education where you've got, particularly in like the social sciences, just became essentially activist platforms. And it was just not the place for it. And I think it started kind of with the late 60s, 70s, and it just accelerated. And I think recently you just have a lot of people who are coming out of academia, and it's no longer fact-based, and also like even everything, peer review is shit across most subjects. And so people can just push an agenda.
Yeah, I remember debate, the fun aspect of debating and preparing for it, and the discipline of it, of being able to listen and to be able to.
No, but there's no. I think unfortunately, like you have a generation of students. I don't blame the students. I blame the faculty, where they've just. You can't. In reality, if you want to have any kind of breakthrough in understanding something, you have to understand that you can be wrong. You can disagree. That's okay. And unfortunately, I think you have a generation that has just been taught not that disagreement's a bad thing.
I just remember the LinkedIn saga. Remember earlier this year?
There's a bunch of those, but I think it's this thing where I think people just. I think it would be an incredibly boring world if everybody thinks exactly the same way.
For context, you expressed an opinion and somebody disagreed.
Disagree, but it happens like I get kicked off like twice a year.
And I reported you. And then there was a campaign on LinkedIn to have you come back.
Yeah, which was
they were missing
but,
your.
It was lovely. I was actually in the mountains when all that happened, and I came back. I was like, "What the fuck is this?" I get kicked off like twice a year. It's just automated.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, this time people were just like, "Oh my god, he has to come back." I was like, "Guys, like this just happened in August too. Like, it happens like every 6 months." Because I do think when you have, I don't know, I think most people shouldn't be on social media. I think most people just can't mentally handle 24/7 news. I think a lot of people can't understand that, look, there's 8 billion people on this planet. Not everybody's going to agree with you. And that's what makes everything awesome. And I do think that people take the internet far too seriously. It's funny because growing up in like the 90s and like the early chat rooms and stuff through the internet, those places, that was like the fucking Wild West. Like that was like just fucked up shit was happening. And I loved it. And I think, so for me, like posting stuff online and if it pisses somebody off, like it doesn't bother me.
It's
I think
crazy.
Some people like really would get bothered, but it's like, dude, like I think it's, you can't take any of it seriously. And you also can't judge someone about like what they post online, because you're only seeing like one facet of them. Like I know a lot of VCs who try to make themselves look like the most founder-friendly, lovable people, and they are like the fucking worst people with founders, right? I mean, the internet, you're just viewing one facet, and it's also very much a sort of curated facet of someone's
especially
personality.
LinkedIn, right? It doesn't really.
LinkedIn
You're
is such a
surrounded by people who are,
it's like fucking corporate Blue Sky, which is an even shittier version of Blue Sky, right? Like, I mean, LinkedIn is just so sanitized and vanilla. And so I mean, also weirdly, I think LinkedIn is also the most
Says the
unhinged.
guy that you have. How many followers do you have now on LinkedIn? 20,000, 200,000? I don't know. I stopped
It's
looking.
over 200. I don't know. I don't keep track. It's like 230 something.
Do you make any money from that? Is there an upside from being such a contributor to the platform?
No, fuck no. LinkedIn doesn't give a shit about content creators. Like, it's just, honestly, I was doing it because I was teaching a class at a business school. And this was like during COVID. They were like, oh, you should like be more active because like you're the only one who tells us the truth. So I started doing it. It took off like some things did during COVID. And no, but I don't make a penny off of it.
Which is, I think, how we met. Because I dropped you a message. You might.
It might have been Airton who introduced us. I can't remember.
No, I think we came full circle when you started working with Ertan.
Yeah.
But I think I dropped you a message because you were talking about scientists and tech transfer
'cause
offices.
I was like
and we were at the beginning of Wilbe. It was we were broke, living on the Isle of Wight, and
Because I was
just
always
getting
involved
started.
in spin outs and always been doing deep tech investments.
Yeah.
And yeah, honestly, like in Europe, nobody really ever talks about that type of stuff. It's only like the last couple of years, all of a sudden you've got a bunch of European investors saying that they're deep tech investors. I was like, God, you're fucking not. Before this, you were investing in like, fast food delivery services. Like you can't. Now you're doing quantum deals. It's just so fucking weird.
So you've been back on the platform after that shamble.
So it's just automated, right? So like if you have somebody who flags a bunch of posts, you get kind of put on suspension where they evaluate your posts, and then it takes like 4 days normally, and you're back on, which is all that was. And I was like in the mountain. I didn't know people were like fucking doing posts saying, I was like, guys, this is automated. This happens to me like every 6 months. Like,
There's something though with this moderation aspect, because right when that happened, if you remember, that's also when Mark Zuckerberg changed their moderation policy, and I think that what we're living right now in many parts of Europe is this forced sanitized, where I don't think we feel totally free of saying what we think.
No, I can tell you. I think so. Look at the UK. In UK, there are, well, the FT said there's about 1,000 arrests a month for social media posts, which is just. I think people. Maybe a percentage of those are validated, but I think the vast majority are not. You can't. It'd be like going down to the pub and starting to arrest people who are talking shit after a few pints. Like you can't. At some point in time, you also have to have this sort of understanding that there is freedom of speech, and people need to be able to say things. You don't necessarily believe those things that you say. Sometimes you just, because people are just like, oh my god, like that's so much conviction to post that stuff on LinkedIn. I'm like, dude, like there's no fucking kids posting online. Like it doesn't take much.
Yet you take the effort of also replying to those that comment.
Sometimes, because some of the people are just. What's fascinating to me, I think LinkedIn is the most unhinged platform because everybody's profile is, in theory, public, right? Like it's their real. It's not. There's no anonymity, right?
Yeah.
And yet you have people who you can see where they went to school, what their job history is, where they're currently employed, just commenting like unstable shit, and you're just like, wow, that's, to me, it's far more of a fucked up platform that way than X. Because in X, like, people are anonymous, right? You're just kind of like, okay, whatever. You have people here where literally you can see all their connections, everything else, and they're just saying like crazy shit. To me, that is just 1,000 times more bizarre than if somebody just posting some sort of like hate meme on fucking X. It's like, guys, like we can see where you work, like you can see where you live, you can see where you went to school. You can see who you know, and people are comfortable just saying.
And there's a lot of posturing, I think. So there are the unhinged one, but also those that are unhinged. They know that whatever they're saying is connected with their workplace, and and so that may affect them as employees.
You get, I think, even I don't think there's a lot of. I mean, just to even take away the legality issue of. I do think in Europe there's been a lot of sort of step backwards on freedom of speech, but even in like the world of startups and VC in Europe, just because the governments are so involved in the funding of VCs, science, funding rounds, etc., I think most people in the ecosystem here do not feel free to make comments.
Wow.
And I think that's, and I've had literally, like, I had a guy the other day who he messaged me because he was getting money from one of the large EI blank organizations. And he's like, dude, I just really want to thank you. He's like, they have fucked me over a bunch of times, but I'm getting money from them, so I can't say it publicly. And and you get that from a lot of these institutions where I think because there is the line in tech, in the VC ecosystem here, the line between the private sector and the public sector is just so blurred. A lot of the VCs here, a lot of the entrepreneurs here don't want to say something negative about the governments because they're afraid that they don't want to be the one who bites the hand that feeds them. At the same point in time, you're not going to have a real progress and open conversation because people are afraid to have it. So, but yeah, when you go to dinner and stuff, everybody bitches about the same shit. But then when it comes to the time public, like, oh shit, we can't say anything. I don't take any government money, so I can just tell them to fuck off.
If you remember this time last year, we had passed on a good potential injection from a government.
Yeah.
And that was exactly the idea. Is the fact that suddenly you
lose your autonomy.
Yeah, exactly right.
You lose your ability to really be objective and to be critical. And I think it's something that the ecosystem here desperately is struggling to deal with. I think I've heard it from entrepreneurs, I've heard it from VCs where they're like, look, this is fucked up, but we can't say it just because, again, the governments are just so involved in everything. Well, you look at deals, right, where if you're looking at like two competing term sheets, it might be 40% of the term sheets on both sides are from the same government. And so also the governments are just propping up valuations, they're competing, they basically just have everybody competing against each other. And so I think there was a crazy stat that came out in France that...
So what you're saying that the government is an LP in the fund?
And sometimes also a direct investor.
And
then also, like, sometimes because they're an LP in lots of different funds, if you actually look at two competing term sheets, you will have, in any given European country, significant 30, 40, 50% between the LP capital and the direct capital is coming from that same government entity.
Well, let's break down what that means, because in capitalism, in the US there is no such thing as a public body backing your fund, right?
No. Like, you can get like, if you're in certain sectors, right, you might get money grant from the DoD, but you're not getting they're not coming in as an LP. Where here and they're coming as a direct investor. It's usually non-dilutive capital. But in Europe, you might get the same government coming in with non-dilutive capital, dilutive capital, direct capital, LP capital, etc. And I think honestly, it's hard to know just how vibrant the ecosystems here are, just because they're so heavily subsidized.
Yeah.
So I remember having I've mentioned this story before, but I remember having dinner with a pretty well-known French entrepreneur several years back. And he's like, look, you have to understand there's no venture capital here. There's no venture capitalists. There's venture fonctionnaires, which in French, fonctionnaire is bureaucrat. And so even the VCs are just working for the state.
Oh, because they all have money from BPI? What's it called?
Yeah. I think there's a stat that just came out that over 80% of venture-backed startups in France have money from the BPI.
Which is a national bank.
Yeah. So it's just like
the equivalent of British Business Bank here.
BBB in the UK, KfW in Germany, SET in Spain, etc.
Yeah. That's, again, another tough decision that we made when raising Fund 1, because it would have made everything much easier to have, the government and different pockets of money were made available.
Yeah.
But again, the energy that they were bringing. I mean, sure, the capital, you don't want to reject capital, but at the same time, we were getting started, and we were new to fund investment.
Yeah.
And I was being literally assessed by a 26 years old who was a branch manager of a retail unit of a national bank in Sheffield or something like that, Manchester. The relationship here is not going to be very fruitful.
No, it's not.
And then I don't even know if our product market fit is true, if I'm getting subsidized. So I want to know if my fund is good, like if we can perform.
But there's so many strings attached, right? And I think I think also these government LP entities. So as much as they, on one hand, might be helping companies get funding that they might not otherwise get, if the governments fixed a lot of the capital market issues, there wouldn't be as much of a need for these government LPs. But at the same point in time, having things like, if you raise the fund in whatever, the UK, you have to invest whatever, 80%, whatever the hell the thing is, like, right? A certain percentage of the funding has to go locally. And in reality, that's just not how investing works anymore. Like, you can't, Europe needs to think sort of as Europe, and then you have all these national entities which just think locally, as if the deal's
I can't imagine having to wake up in the morning. And I was having this conversation with another couple of LPs, especially in science, because science is transnational, if you like. It's not that you're saying, I'm going to develop a vaccine that is just for the UK, right? So you have to pick the best talent from across the world.
And so that's the thing. It's already hard enough to make venture work and be successful in venture without then putting arbitrary restrictions on top of your thesis, right? Like, to say we're going to invest in the very best advanced computing companies in Germany. Like, to add those extra layers of whether it's geographic restriction or et cetera, that's just making the jobs of the VCs almost impossible. But again, I don't think the governments don't care about the success of the VCs. That's not their KPI. They're basically using it as an economic development tool. So in Europe, venture is largely not an asset class, it's an economic development tool.
So in effect, what you're raising, if you're raising from a government, you're raising marketing money.
It's venture
you're
socialism.
working, so you're in effect working for the government.
Which it goes back to that French entrepreneur's point of being like, they're not VCs, they're bureaucrats. They're venture bureaucrats. They're not capitalists.
I understand that now, yeah.
And so again, like, it's just the mentality here of, it's not about maximizing the upside of these funds. It's like, how many investments as us as KfW, BPI, or whatever, how many can we say that we did this year?
Yeah.
And they'll pat themselves on the fucking back, thinking they did a great job. And in reality, how many actual exits are there?
This is quite relatable for our friends, scientists, founders. The way that they think about dilutive capital and non-dilutive, so grants and equity. And then also the KPIs, the kind of KPIs that TTOs have. So for how much they're trying to behave like corporates that, we want shares, we'll be your partner and all of that. Really, they're counting individual companies as a one, right? So they're saying, here's an extra spin out. I'm hitting 12 spin-outs per year, so I'm winning.
All these silly things, like when Macron came out and said, we want 25 French unicorns. So it's a vanity metric. Who gives a shit? Like, it only matters is, like, are you going to have any international leaders in a given category? Are you going to have how many? Because again, like, a unicorn based on valuation, who gives a shit? You want unicorns based on exit value.
Yeah, of course.
25 exited unicorns? Yeah, way more fucking interesting. That hasn't happened. And that probably won't happen.
So I know that you're in town and you've got another meeting to head to. Takes time to get around London.
Too long.
Have you tried cycling with the Uber bikes as well?
No. I took the tube over here, which is always an interesting experience.
It's not a bad way to get around, especially with...
I actually quite like the Elizabeth line now. I think
that's not the tube, right?
No, that's like a proper line. It's like, they should just do everything, but it would cost like... And that thing was like, how far over... It took too long to build. It was way over cost.
And I just wanted to send you out, before you left, so clearly it's really a good service for you to kind of pick at the scabs of within Europe look at, this is not working well. We're
That's the
patting
thing,
ourselves on the back.
like, I fundamentally believe in Western civilization, and I want Western civilization to be successful. In order for that to happen, Europe has to handle its part of that, and part of that means it needs to have a successful and vibrant entrepreneurial and tech sector, and that for me is deep tech. Even though I hate the fucking term deep tech, it's like this weird nebulous thing that doesn't really mean anything. But it has to be like high tech, hard tech, frontier tech, whatever the hell you want to call it. It has to be good at that. And so I think Europe does sometime. Europe is just too fucking soft. It needs a stick, and sometimes you just have to call. And there's a lot of. I mean, God, there's another.
But
EU.
will you be enough as a stick? Because sometimes you need a profound crisis, right? Usually, new countries come out.
I think Europe is going to have to I think for there to be real reform in Europe, there's going to have to be a hard economic pain felt. I think part of that's going to come, right? I mean, I think there's going to be a massive burden in terms of pensions. I think you had this sort of focus in Europe. We can go on a whole another thing about this, but like you had this sort of entrenched in certain capitals in Europe, like the degrowth thought, which is to me just the most fucking bonkers thing. But you get a lot of like just really dumb.
I remember that the ESG kind of
ESG took over.
Manic
you get like, I mean, I remember speaking at a conference in the Netherlands, and they were just like, "Oh my God, how many?" The Dutch were like, these people from the Dutch government were super happy about how many trillions it was going to take the Netherlands to get to net zero. Yeah. And my point was like, who fucking cares? If the Netherlands gets to net zero, who gives a shit? You just spent trillions, to get a country to net zero, that it getting to net zero has absolutely no impact on the global environment, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, wouldn't it be more interesting?
It's more like virtual signaling.
It's just virtue signaling, right? And it's like become very in vogue by the bourgeois of Europe. But like, wouldn't it have been more interesting to say, okay, instead of spending that, whatever the hell it was, 2 trillion, 3 trillion, whatever, on getting the Netherlands to net zero, when the CO2 rates of the Netherlands is actually already quite low, and it's a teeny tiny country, nobody gives a shit. Wouldn't it have been more interesting to take those trillions and spend it on something like fusion, or on financial products to actually get the countries that do produce a lot of CO2 to get it lower, right? So I think it's just this virtue signaling, killing common sense, and you just seen it a lot in Europe. Well, the fact is now, I mean, think about it.
And usually this is drafted by bureaucrats, not by entrepreneurs or social engineers.
God, no. And it's just people who just, you put the priority of virtue signaling above actual outcomes, right? Where, I mean, you look at something like, sovereignty. I don't believe Europe is sovereign on most things, but you look at something like data sovereignty, right? So a big issue in Europe is that Europe has less than 1/3, it's closer to probably a quarter, of the data center capacity that the U.S. has. And the U.S. is currently building a record amount of data center capacity. And so the problem in Europe is like, you can't actually build a lot of big data centers because of all the restrictions and regulations. And it's like, well, how much of that inhibits progress in other areas? To say like, well, we're sovereign, it's like, but you're not, because you don't have data sovereignty, you don't have tech sovereignty, you don't have financial sovereignty, you don't have defense sovereignty, you don't have security sovereignty. But it's like, but we're getting to net zero.
Yeah.
No, like, by diminishing the quality of your industry, I don't see how that's really a net positive. And I'm not saying like, yeah, cool, like reopen the coal mines and shit. I'm just like, look, you have to prioritize. Is literally making it damn near impossible to build data centers at scale in Europe to get to any kind of. I mean, there's a lot of government agencies in Europe whose data is sitting not in their home country because they don't have capacity.
Yep,
infrastructure. And so it's like, and same thing for defense, right? Like, Europe has underspent on defense for a considerable long time, and yet, I mean, The Guardian just ran an article talking about like, but like increased defense spending in Europe is going to increase our CO2 production. It's just like, guys, like, you can't, you gotta fucking pick and choose your priorities.
It's tough to do things like this when you're in a position of abundance. Like economic, we don't have enough.
Yeah, it's just, you can't, I don't like, so when you talk about like, okay, what's the next big wave? If you're thinking AI is going to be this game-changing, global game-changing technology, Europe isn't in a great position to be a big winner, just because, look, I mean, it doesn't have the data center capacity.
Infrastructure.
It's got infrastructure shit. It's got the highest, and there's not a single European country that has lower industrial electricity costs than the US or China. So its electricity costs are super fucking high. It doesn't have the data center capacity. It doesn't have the GPUs, right? Like NVIDIA, there's a stat that came out that I think less than 3% of deployed chips from NVIDIA, deployed GPUs from NVIDIA are in Europe.
Wow.
So you don't have the fucking muscle for it, right? And so in Europe, right, there's no tech giants from Europe. I mean, there's no big internet companies that got started in Europe. There's only like one big-ish software company. Most of the semiconductor companies in Europe are on the supply chain side, because like the big one, the actual producers like ST and Infineon are just, nobody fucking stays up worrying about them.
Does this need more government intervention in terms of cash?
No, I think the governments need to get the hell out of the way.
Deregulation?
I think deregulation and get the hell out of the way.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, so I mean, the answer for Europe can't just be like, oh, we need a venture capital ecosystem, so let the government do it. That's just such a horrible job, like a horrible amount of reasoning. And there's the old, what is it, the old saying about insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And it just looks like it's going to be another wave of real value in job creation and just impactful technology innovation that Europe is going to miss out on, because it's just doing shit the same way.
So worst case scenario, things are happening quite fast these days.
Yeah.
So let's say 5 years from now or 10 years from now, what are we seeing? So we have the aging population. We're not ahead in AI, and we're not looking like we're catching up in any way.
But that's why I think Europe should just lean into the fact that it's not going to lead. Like Europe, I mean, so I was just in Zurich, right? So Zurich, I think it's Google's, one of their biggest sort of engineering hubs is in Zurich, right? And so it's like Europe can be a really nice place for people to work for international tech giants, right? And it's just like, it's just accept the fact that like, I mean, there's been one European company created in the last 50 years that has a public market cap above 100 billion. And so I think it's going to be probably another 50 years of similar kind of outcome. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. It can just be people who are working for the next generation of tech giants, and they're working at their office in Zurich or Munich or Cambridge or whatever.
Hence the relationship with those countries, the countries where the tech giants are from. So with the US is going to be pretty key. You can't really posture in front of...
No, also, there's no posture. I mean, if you have having Ursula from the EU kind of act like a commander-in-chief when she's not a commander-in-chief, when she was actually like running the defense ministry in Germany, the German army was training with broomsticks. I mean, there's not a lot of validity, right? Like Europe doesn't have, it's not in a position to really act like a big kid on the block, because it's not.
Yeah. There's no unity anyway.
There's no,
behind
It
Ursula.
was Kissinger who said like, I think it was Kissinger who said, okay, if like there's a problem in Europe, who do you call?
Yeah. And massive questions. Maybe next time that we sit again, we will find ourselves...
We should do this regularly.
Yeah, big time. Come to London more regularly. Oh, there's our favorite fun behind us. Thank you. We got groupies now.
No, it's just there's a lot of big questions that need to be answered, but I don't think...
Over the last year or two, actually, I spent more time looking at the macro aspects than the micro. So, in fact, the conference in Berlin, the content was not relevant at all in what I think should be discussed amongst venture investors. It was this obsession about fundraising, the fees and all of that.
Because again, it's like, that's what, look, VC in Europe it's a small game.
Yeah.
And so they're all just desperate to raise money. I think most European VCs, if they actually had any common sense, would do most of their fundraising outside of Europe and just offer Europe as like a geographic diversification for these larger institutions. But again, I think you end up with those events like Superventure or whatever, which is just a bunch of really desperate European VCs trying to figure out how to scrape by a little bit more money for their whatever 30, 40, 50 million euro, pound, whatever fund, which is fine. It's just, it also just shows like the level of achievable ambition in Europe is
Yeah.
tough.
And then the content is just not there. I mean, compared to what you may, the big guys of VC in the US, I don't know, the Josh Wolf at Lux and John Lonsdale, 8VC, A16Z, like they have a very, Silicon Valley approach at times, but
absolutely.
they're prepared, they're holistic, they're challenging the construct of society whenever they're
you start looking like what's going to be really fucking impactful. If I'm just like, wow, I mean, what could be the potential outcome on creating huge companies in the space of CRISPR, for example? I mean, gene editing has the potential for it is just like it's the stuff of science fiction, right? But if I talk to the average European public bank, bureaucrat, politician, VC, whatever, it's not something they think about, right? It's very much it's very short-term thinking.
Yeah.
It's not like, okay, what could really change the world 10, 20 years from now? I think those are far more interesting conversations to have.
Yeah.
And I have far more of those types of conversations with investors in the US than I ever do with investors in Europe.
Maybe next session we'll do it around that. How about that, Michael?
Cool, let's do it.
MJ, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Excellent. That's it.